So let's start with a look at how global energy commodities performed. Just behind me here, we can see for the first time in as many weeks, Brent did breach the $80 per barrel mark. So the week started off on a bullish note, $80 per barrel, and that was because of two major production cuts in Libya and Nigeria, with almost a total of 800,000 barrels a day taking off the market. We saw in Nigeria challenges with Forcados evacuation, and in Libya as well, there was some disruption to production output in that country. So Brent hit $80 a barrel, but towards the end of the week, as at Friday, Brent is down by 1.41% as concerns over global demand surge. And of course, we saw slightly strengthening with the US dollar. Same outlook really for gasoline, for gas, and for WTI crude in North America. Let's look at what's happening on the Nigeria stock market. It was a very volatile week for, Nigeria stock markets. All share index was down by 29 basis points to 62,569.73. And actually, market cap dropped by almost more than 700 billion naira. So we're seeing quite a lot of volatility in stock markets this week. Financial services were one of the biggest losers in the past week, but not a bad level for deal volumes at 9,554. So what's happening elsewhere around the world with global stocks? Let's take a look at the European markets. Euro Stock 600 was down by 11 bips, and it was really a bearish outlook for the rest of the markets around Europe, except for Paris, which was up by 6 bips, might as well have stayed flat. And I think the main challenge really here was around inflation concerns. We know as well in the UK, wage inflation is a concern. I'll be talking about what Rishi Sunak, the PM in the UK, is trying to do with that later on. Let's look at what's happening on Wall Street. Probably a slightly contrasted picture here. All the markets in Wall Street are up. And actually, there's two reasons why that is happening. The first one is US inflation appears to be slowing down. I'll be talking with Bode Oshasami about that a bit later. That's the first thing. And of course, I think the next big thing was the US banks' earnings. Its earnings season's results have been coming out for Q2, and it's looking pretty good for the big US banks. So all the markets responding on a bullish note to all of that. Dow Industrial Index was up 36 bips, S&P 500 up 15 bips, and of course NASDAQ Composite Index up 33 bips. Well, here are my business top picks for the week. What's happening around the world? First story here is that ChatGPT is in the eye of the storm with US regulators. The FTC is now saying that developers, technology developers around the world, need to slow down on the development of generative AI. The regulator has concerns around cyber security, concerns around misinformation, and of course concerns around anti-Semitism as well as bigotry comments on the platform. So there's going to be a review of the pace of development of that technology. We'll see how that pans out. Interesting developments here for those sending money from overseas to Nigerians. Central Bank has ruled that receivers of money from overseas senders can now receive their money in local naira currency. And this is really a big one because it follows with the pace of FX controls. The government is laxing and relaxing those controls. And it essentially means that if you want to send somebody in Nigeria some money from the UK or US, they can receive that money locally in naira, and they can change that money at the investor and exporter's window. The big implication here is that it introduces and allows more liquidity in the system. And that's one of the things we've been saying about FX controls. If you relax those controls and there's no liquidity, then honestly, it's self-defeating. So good news here for Diaspora Remittances. What else do we have? Egypt has announced a 1.9 billion sale of assets. Egypt has about 32 government-owned companies that it's been trying to sell for a couple of years. And of course, buyers and sellers are a bit mismatched in the expectations. It sold that to UAE investors as well as Egyptian private investors. Let's not forget that the Egyptian economy has been going through some macroeconomic headwinds. Inflation as high as 36%. Of course, we saw almost $20 billion taken out of that economy over the last 2 years as investors were searching for yield in other markets. Nigeria has redeemed a $500 million 10-year Eurobond. Good news for Nigeria bond investors there, but that's not the first time we've seen a redemption. We saw the redemption of the Diaspora bond, $300 million Diaspora bond last year, and we've also seen Nigeria also redeem bonds in 2018 and 2021, also $500 million in value. So good signaling for the government's ability to meet its capital market obligations in Eurobonds. Standard Chartered is selling its businesses in the African market in Angola, in Cameroon, I believe in Rwanda and a couple of other countries. Big opportunity here for Nigeria's Access Bank to spread its Pan-African business. It's looking at strengthening its digital payments efforts and platforms, and probably following in the footsteps of Pan-African lenders like EcoBank, who have been in the African market, almost 30 countries, and we have other banks like UBA and others that are trying to spread their tentacles across the African market. Of course, quite a lot of cash goes into these investments. They still have to be approved by regulators, both in Nigeria as well in other markets. It's worth mentioning that Standard Chartered Nigeria is not part of the portfolio of locations that is being sold to Access Bank. And then finally, what do we have? UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has unveiled a final wage offer of between 5 to 7% for public sector workers. And how is the UK going to fund this? It is planning to increase visa fees for overseas visitors, not just visa fees. It's also planning to increase the NHS surcharge for foreign visitors using the UK healthcare system. And the UK government said it is raising about £1 billion worth of funding as a result of those new visa fee hikes. Now, this is really interesting because, of course, the UK government cannot borrow more. It's worried about wage inflation. It doesn't want to incur more debt. But it means that those coming from overseas or applying for visas will have to face increased visa fees. So interesting times there for the UK. Let's look at what is happening elsewhere in markets around the world. Well, in Nigeria, following the recent strategic investment made by Nigeria's Honeywell Group in FBN Holdings PLC through the purchase of majority shares in the holding company, EcoBank Nigeria, a subsidiary of ETI, in a letter through its lawyer and addressed to FBN Holdings, has pointed out that Nigeria's Honeywell Group and its founder, the chairman, Oba Otudeko, were indebted to EcoBank Nigeria to the tune of 13 billion naira. It stated that with the investment in FBN Holdings, Honeywell Group and Otudeko were diverting funds that ought to have been used for repayment of the loans. Meanwhile, the Honeywell Group says its additional investment in FBN Holdings PLC is aimed at creating more value for all shareholders. And the group has also announced its acquisition of an additional equity of almost 5 billion shares of First Bank through its investment company, Barbican Limited. The acquisition by Barbican Limited makes it the largest shareholder in FBN with a total stake of 15.1%. Although there was an increase in market capitalization in FBN Holdings following that announcement, earlier in the week, investors now appear to be reacting negatively to the shareholder squabble in the bank after FBN Holdings stocks fell by almost 20% following a 2-year high earlier in the week. Interesting times there for Nigeria's financial services sector. Now, the president of Nigeria has declared a state of emergency on food security. Presidential spokesman Dele Alake made this known while briefing State House correspondents on Thursday. The president directed that all matters pertaining to food and water availability and affordability as essential livelihood items fall under the purview of the National Security Council. The directive was said to be in line with Tinubu's position on ensuring that the most vulnerable are supported. Alake also said that the president was not unmindful of the rising cost of food and its effect on the pocket of citizens. Well, inflation in the U.S., as measured by the change in the consumer price index, declined to 3% on a yearly basis in June from 4% in May, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on Wednesday. The reading came in slightly below the market expectation of 3.1%. Still in the U.S., it's results season, as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, and 3 of the largest U.S. banks reported a surge in profits from charging more from loans as the Federal Reserve's series of interest rates rises fattened their bottom lines. Of course, banks make money from their net interest income, which is the spread between what they pay on deposits and what they receive as interest rate payments from their debtors. JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo collectively earned $49 billion in net interest income in the second quarter, the difference between what the banks pay for deposits and earn from the loans and other assets. The figure was 30% higher than the same period last year and shows how certain lenders have been able to cash in since the Fed's tightening began in March 2022. A U.S. appeals court denied a Federal Trade Commission bid to pause Microsoft Corporation acquisition of Activision Blizzard on Friday, clearing a path for the companies to close the largest gaming deal ever in the U.S. The Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruling means that only U.K. regulators stand between the companies closing the deal before a July 18 deadline. Britain's Antitrust Appeals Court has scheduled an August hearing to discuss the company's request to pause the challenge to deal by the country's competition agency. Now, to further expand its retail channels in one of its most significant regions, Apple on Tuesday opened an online store on Tencent's WeChat messaging platform in China. With more than 1.2 billion users, WeChat is the largest messaging service in China. It extends beyond mere instant chatting, earning it the moniker Super App. Users have also access to mini programs, which are essentially WeChat apps. This means users can get all the services they require directly from WeChat, eliminating the need for them to download numerous other apps. Elon Musk's Tesla is poised to gatecrash Britain's energy market by selling electricity to households. Tesla is developing plans to register as an electricity provider with the industry regulator and launch a retail electricity product in the UK. That's according to a job listing platform. The company is hiring an experienced energy executive as its UK head of operations for Tesla Electric. Finally, chip designer ARM is in talks to bring in NVIDIA as an anchor investor as it presses ahead with plans for a New York listing as soon as September. NVIDIA, the world's most valuable semiconductor company, was forced last year to abandon its planned $66 billion acquisition of ARM after the deal was challenged by regulators. The Silicon Valley-based chipmaker is one of several existing ARM partners, including Intel. That's the UK-based company that's helping to ride out its initial public offering state. Prospective investors are still negotiating with ARM over its valuation, as ARM targets as high as $80 billion. Well, that's it for the market roundup.